Hey guys, before we jump in, brand new for the summer, we've got fresh episodes and powerful interviews focused on healing from abuse, trauma, and toxic family systems. You're not alone, and these podcasts are for you. Also, we've just launched our brand new Substack. You'll find even more content there, weekly articles, reflections, and exclusive insights to support your healing journey all in one place. Now, let's jump into today's episode.
Because they're more in tuned with their emotions and their feelings, and probably even more accepting of feelings are not bad. They are more so indicators, just more so embracing that. To become more self-aware is to be more in tune with life, really, to live a better life. So to grieve fully, there's a saying, when we grieve fully, we're able to live fully.
Welcome to the Your Story Matters podcast with Branon Dempsey. Your Story Matters is dedicated to help survivors of abuse grow in their healing and recovery from trauma. While we may not be able to change our beginning, we do have the power to change the ending. We hope that you'll be inspired by today's message because you matter. Your healing matters because your story matters. Here's Branon.
Navigating through grief and healing trauma is one of the most difficult, painful things that we can do in life. When we suffer loss or some tragedy, abusive event, or the loss of a loved one, it's not only something that can just be painful for years to come, but just the trauma of having to work through it and operate in daily life becomes troublesome. And I can't think of a better friend to have along with us for the ride than our special guest, Natasha Smith. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Your Story Matters podcast. I'm Branon Dempsey, and we asked before we jump into our conversation, please hit the subscribe button so that you can get all the latest episodes when they drop. So, Natasha Smith, she is the author and podcast host for her Can You Sit With Me broadcast, and you can find her book on Amazon, Can You Just Sit With Me? Forgive me. And it's a healthy grieving for the losses of life. So you need to check out her book. You can also find Natasha Smith on all socials and also Substack. So Natasha, how are you today? So great to have you. Thanks for being with us.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm so looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. I'm very intrigued in listening to your podcast, Can You Just Sit With Me? So I'm just kind of getting my feet wet with you, and we want to learn more about you. So can you tell us more about yourself, who you are, and what you're about?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Again, I'm Natasha Smith. I'm a wife, a mom of four. I'm an engineer turned homeschooler turned author.
Right.
And so right now you can find me writing and just putting out content all related to grief and helping those. I'm very passionate about helping those navigate grief and, just have a heart for those who are hurting and burdened by grief because of my own personal story.
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad that we're connected. Theo Boyd put us together. So she was on the show earlier, and I'm so glad that she introduced your name to me. And thank you very much for being here. So tell us, this is the very start of our podcast here. What I ask every guest, what's your story?
Yeah. So my story kind of starts back over 30 years. So over 30 years, I've basically sat with grief. So I just had a succession of loss after loss. Those losses included half of my immediate family, like the loss of my dad, the death of two of my older sisters, one when I was in college, so late teens. So I was still a teenager when I lost one of my sisters. And then the next to the oldest when I was like early 30s. And then I had a nephew that died by gun violence. So he was murdered and then suffered the losses from miscarriage as well as stillbirth. So a lot of loss by losing loved ones, but also living losses, that what I like to call them. So just loss of career, even though, well, you heard the change from engineer to homeschooler, that was a huge shift for me. And it did cause some grief. I like the work that I did. And I like homeschooling as well, but it's still that change and transition it did cause grief. And also I had in my high school years, like going into my senior year, I placed a child into adoptive care. And so that is a living loss as well, and something that I grieve daily.
Wow. Yeah, that definitely is a lot. So you're helping people with their grief, and you're also, you spent an enormous amount of time going through the shards of all the broken glass in your life. So in that pursuit of helping and speaking on grief, what event or what person in your life got you through it to influence your journey for healing and helping others?
Yeah, I love this question so much because, again, when I say I sat with grief, it was like I didn't know what to do with it, especially a lot of the grief happening in my younger years, and people not really talking about the types of griefs that I experienced. And so not really knowing what to do with it, where to go with it. So I stuffed it, ignored it, tried to keep myself busy, all the things to kind of avoid the grief. But then 2020 came, and we were all kind of thrown into this craziness of, and really we were all grieving. So we were going through this collective grief as well. But, if you look and turn on TV and everything around you, really you were hearing and seeing death and just everything grief in front of us. And so I couldn't escape the grief at that moment. And so that's when I began to start to write about it and notice how it resonated with people. So fast forward from over 30 years to 2020, that's when I really started to do a deep dive into processing my own grief. So it's really only been 4 years since I began to process all those losses that I mentioned earlier on. And one of the catalysts to that was this group. It really wasn't a grief group, but it was a group that was held at my church that included, it was a program that it was called Freedom, but it kind of helped to dig up different things in your life. And for me, grief was the big thing with all the roots, and that has been, coloring my life and influencing everything around me that I really wasn't dealing with, but it was coming out in different ways.
You're listening to Your Story Matters with Branon Dempsey. We invite you to subscribe to this podcast and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, X, and Threads at Branon Dempsey, Your Story Matters. Now back to our episode.
Wow. Well, there's 3 things that you said that I really want to hit on that I love. You talked about how others don't talk about grief, processing, and then there's a spiritual side of this. So let's go to the first component. Why is it that people don't handle grief very well, or they don't talk about it?
Yeah, so many influences, right? So we have the influence of our family. So depending on how your family grieved, we most likely would grieve the way we saw our family or our parents or our caretakers grieve. So for me, it was like that space between the death of your loved one and then the funeral, and that was your space. That's your time. So after that, you should be okay. And so I really didn't have a model for what healthy grieving looks like. So that's one influence. And then our culture, right? So our culture, we're in a fast-paced society. We don't have time to grieve, we hardly get time off for work, So culture, society, and then we can have that spiritual or biblical insight as well that kind of dictates the way we grieve, depending on what faith or the faith that you have. So those things can kind of dictate or definitely influence the way that we grieve.
Mm. Can we talk about shame for a moment?
Yeah.
Because we know that shame is the ultimate silencer, and that's what keeps us from telling our story.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Let me just ask you the question. Do you think that shame holds people back from grieving?
I love that so much. Go ahead.
And then what kind of shame are we talking about?
Yeah. Wow, that's powerful because I really believe so. And again, I think it comes back to what are your personal core beliefs or how you grew up, what's influencing you. So for me, I grew up in the church, and there can be this mindset that, if you're grieving, quote unquote, too long, then your faith isn't strong enough. And so, how are you doing? Oh, I'm fine. I'm doing good. I'm blessed and highly favored, and so it could be a putting on of airs because there's a shame. It's like, it's been a year. I should be okay. So we start putting limitations on our grief when we really don't have to. There's nothing that's telling us that, grief doesn't really follow a timeline. And so we have shame and we keep it to ourselves, and then we end up grieving in silence. But then another, I feel like a big example is even the grief that is associated with things that are considered shameful, I guess, So just say, I had a baby when I was a teenager, so a teen pregnancy, and I placed the child in adoptive care. So those actions that are what is deemed, that was my choice, those things are deemed unworthy to be grieved by some in society. So that's like a disenfranchised grief. And so those type of griefs, most definitely, it can be the same for for drug addiction, alcoholism, so those type of things can be seen as, there's shame associated with it. So you don't really deserve to grieve because those are choices.
So are you saying that some may say that you don't deserve to grieve?
Right. So those type of losses aren't worthy to be grieved.
Where do you think that comes from? When people say that and you're expressing a hurt and they say, like what you just mentioned earlier, well, you shouldn't be thinking about that, or it's been a year, right? I mean, aren't you okay by now?
Yeah.
What's the thought behind it when a person says those things? What do you think? Maybe they have their own grief and their own shame that they're not being honest. Do you feel that? I mean, you've suffered a lot, and you've had to encounter that where people just kind of look back at you, and in their heart, they're you're looking at them in their eyes, and you got this feeling like, well, you're grieving with something also, but you're not telling me. And it's almost like hypocritical, is it not?
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. Yeah. It's true. I know I have experienced that before where, like, I know, someone was grieving, yet I heard them say words that were kind of counter to what I know that they were experiencing. So maybe that is it. I hadn't thought about that.
Well, but then it makes you feel less worthy, right? It makes you feel like, well, gee, maybe my grief is not like theirs. And I know in Theo's book, she talks about that. My grief is not your grief, right?
Yes.
And that's a really good thing to say.
Yeah.
But it's hard to do in that moment because you feel so heavy.
Mm-hmm. I think I lost your audio. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Is my video still going or the audio?
Nothing right this second.
Is my video freezing?
Okay. I think it's catching up. That was, it like played really fast.
I was afraid that's going to happen.
Oh, okay.
All right. I'm going to cut that. All right. So, how did that make you feel as a survivor of grief when people look at you and they say like really half-hearted, shallow things to you? And how do you work through that now?
Yeah. So I think I've experienced enough to know that people don't know what they don't know. And it's not a cop-out, or it's not like a excuse, but I really, really understand that a lot of people are not aware. Like, they really are not aware. And it's like this conversation, and then like my podcast, the conversations I have on my podcast, it's like amplifying and bringing awareness to these things that most often people are not aware of. Because what I found is no one is teaching us how to respond to those who are hurting and grieving in the right ways. And yeah, we would want, and we really, really would love for people to have more empathy, more compassion, and to just be kind, to be honest, right? But most often, because our world is like turning and it's fast paced, and we got to get to all the places, pick up the kids, we are not taking the time to settle in and to really sit with someone. Yeah. I think I just lost your video now.
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
Hold on. That's not you. Okay. Hold on a second, Natasha.
Mm-hmm.
That's so weird. Half the time I wonder if it's spiritual warfare or human error.
I know. No, that's the truth.
Yeah. All right. So let's continue. Cut that. I'm trying to remember my question that I had off of that. Do you find that this just hit me now hearing you talk? When we speak about shame, grief, and there has to be honesty, right?
Mm-hmm.
Within the interplay of both of them. Do you find that people who actually grieve are those who they feel maybe a level of freedom to grieve and be honest, versus those who aren't grieving and can't be honest? Do you see a correlation?
So with grievers and non-grievers, you mean?
Right. So people who grieve are honest about their trauma versus those who don't. Is there a correlation?
I think so. And maybe it's because it's more, let me take that back. Let me say, if the griever is working through their grief. And I say that because, if you're bringing it to the surface, because, years ago, if I'm stuffing it and ignoring it and avoiding it, no, I'm not really going to be talking about it, right? But if I'm working through my grief, I'm processing it now. And so I'm talking about it more. And so, yes, there is a freedom there. And yes, I have encountered people that I know have things, and I feel like they're kind of in the place that I was in. where I wasn't dealing with it and I'm avoiding.
As we take this quick break, did you know that most of our podcasts are also video recorded? Search our YouTube page at Branon Dempsey. Your story matters. Subscribe and watch our video episodes.
Natasha, when it comes to a person who is having to process grief, do you find that those who do are more honest with their trauma versus those who don't share their grief? Or is there a difference at all? Or do you see a correlation?
Say that. Can you repeat that for me? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So for those who are grieving and they're working through it, do you find that they are more honest with their pain versus those who don't grieve?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's just more of, because they're more in tuned with their emotions and their feelings, and probably even more accepting of feelings are not bad. They are more so indicators, just more so embracing that. To become more self-aware is to be more in tune with life, really, to live a better life. So to grieve fully, there's a saying, when we grieve fully, we're able to live fully.
Mm. Do you find that's what stops people grieving, because it feels bad?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How does a person push through that?
I believe because community is such a big thing as well, like two are really better than one. So if they can connect or even see someone that is like a few steps ahead, to say, okay, if I do this, I'm really going to be okay. Like if I step into, or if I open this can of emotions, I'm not going to explode. It's really going to release some of the pressure that's on the inside of me. So having someone to know, to see someone that has been there and have walked through that and survived, so to speak, gives them a little bit of the courage to do so, I believe.
But that doesn't happen at once. I mean, how did that happen for you? Because that's so hard to get there. Yeah,
absolutely. I really sometimes it's the day by day, right? Taking literally one step, one foot in front of the other, step by step. And so for me, again, it kind of started back with the group at church. And one of the exercises was, and I actually have this same exercise in my book because it was so powerful, but it's literally writing down my losses, writing down those things or events that happen in my life and assigning a feeling to them, like acknowledging what that hurt was or what happened, and assigning feelings to them. And we're more than happy, sad, and mad, So, was it disappointment? Did I feel abandoned? Like really digging down into it. And it takes a while to do. And so, and even rating the pain of it, like how bad did that hurt? Did that really hurt? I look back over mine and I was like, okay, over half of my life is high pain. I'm okay. I'm doing okay. But it was bringing, again, like I mentioned before, that awareness. Like I really wasn't aware because I was like just walking through life trying to ignore everything that I had been through. And so it takes that. It's a process. And so processing means like we can literally take one loss at a time, look at it, acknowledge it, assess it, like how bad did it hurt? Assign some type of pain level to it, assign a feeling to it, and that can kind of start the process.
Mm. So through all of that, I mean, you found your voice.
Yeah.
So how did that happen for you when you began to tell your story in order to help others?
Yeah. It's so crazy because I know even people who know me or who have known me for a while, they're like, I didn't know all that happened to you, because I wasn't telling anyone. But literally 2020 was that magic year of me beginning to tell my story. And what happened was it resonated with so many people because, again, we were experiencing a lot of grief collectively in our world. And so I think when I started to talk more about my grief and tell more about my story, people resonated and said, okay, I feel this too. I've experienced loss too. And then it just kind of began to snowball into me just really sensing like I need to continue in this vein of sharing my story because it is helping others in theirs.
What happens to a person when they don't grieve, when they don't tell their story?
Yeah. What I've learned is that whether we know it or not, it really does spill over into our lives. It really does still affect us internally, whether it's physically, like it can literally affect us physically with headaches, digestion. So it can affect us physically and then mentally as well. Because I know for me, a lot of grief ran in the background. Like, I can be talking, hey, da, da, but the grief is running in the background. And so my mental capacity to do things is limited, whether you're aware of it or not. And so it affects you mentally, physically, as well as spiritually. It can be this wall really between your relationship with God or your faith or expanding in your faith because you're not dealing with something here or not even feeling maybe comfortable with bringing it to God. So it affects all areas of life.
So you talk about God and you talk about how this was for you, your most inspirational push to get you through this. Can you talk a little bit about that? Why is having faith so important for you?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. For me, as I share my story with the 30 years of sitting with it, I know it was only God who helped me through it. Even though I said, I didn't do anything with it, I didn't share it with anyone. In prayer, in attending church, in worship, in personal time with God, He was helping me and He was keeping me for really not losing my mind. Because there was times when I thought, like, this is so overwhelming. Like, am I crazy? I'm not crazy. It's grief. But I didn't have that, like I said, the person that was steps ahead of me, mentoring me or helping me to say, and I didn't do therapy. I just started doing therapy after I finished my first book. So I literally,
never too late.
Right. But that's why I can really say that it was really God that kept me and God who sat with me and me bringing, like, now that I look back to say, I lamented to Him, like bringing what they call like prayers in anger, but ending in hope. Like, why have you done this to me? Why have you forsaken me? And so, really just raw emotions that I gave to Him because I didn't know I didn't have a safe place. I didn't know where to let it out at. So that's why I say, for me, my faith has been an anchor. And of course, I use so many different tools in helping with the day-to-day and practical coping of it. But my faith is foundation for how I cope with grief.
Hey guys, as we take another break, I got some fresh updates for you. Number one, it's my YouTube page in which I put together videos based upon healing from trauma, narcissistic parental abuse, and other topics that come to mind that will help you in your healing journey. You can find them at youtube.com/Branon Dempsey or just search Branon Dempsey, Your Story Matters. The second place is our new Substack page. I write out articles full length that come from the videos that I do from YouTube and also some that I intertwine from this podcast. Simply go to Substack, search up Branon Dempsey, Your Story Matters, subscribe today, and I'll see you there. Thanks so much for your support and following me here on Your Story Matters. Now, let's jump back into the episode. Natasha, we spoke before about shame, but it seems like we keep coming back to this revolving topic because it's so huge. And I believe that there's so many of us that have shame built in from childhood experiences, our upbringing with our family. It could be school. It could be upsets later on in life. And it seems to me that shame compounds itself, right? And then when we're faced with something traumatic, like a loss, and we're grieving, it's almost as if the shame that was previously there in our lives now has become double. Mm. How does a person work through that? Because that's a lot. That's a lot of shame we're talking about.
That is a lot. So you just said so many things in that moment. Literally, but it's things that we all need to hear. Like this is so powerful and so key because we're carrying loads of this shame.
Loads.
So once we experience trauma, loss, and we know we're all going to experience loss, right? We're all going to grieve over someone, something. And so why is it so hard? And why are we feeling ashamed? Because we haven't unpacked the things that in our childhood.
There you go. Yes. So how can I go back? If this is painful enough, right? What happened to me in the 5th grade, how can I deal with something that happened to me at 14 with the loss of my father or so forth?
Mm-hmm. And I think it is that going back to those specific time frames and really addressing the 11-year-old me. You know, the 16-year-old me, it's a lot of work, but it's worthy work. Like it's worth it.
Have you done a lot of work in healing the inner child?
Yes.
That has a lot to do with shame. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Again, I think it's it's along the same lines that we've kind of been talking about. And then just the work that I was doing with writing out those specific things in like the early childhood, because it's basically those events that happen between what you remember, you don't remember from birth, but, early childhood through, early 20s. And so that part of your life shapes a lot of how the lens that we view life in, and it informs everything, a lot of the things we do if we don't deal with it, right? Mm-hmm. And so just kind of taking note to what happened during those time frames. For me, it was, once I identified those things, I began to look for threads of what inner vows or mindsets that I have formulated because of those things. Like there were patterns. Like one of those patterns was, those who love me leave me, but it wasn't because I was left on a doorstep. It was because people died. There was a lot of people that just died in my life. And so it's, and then some abandonment things.
I was going to say, abandonment is such a huge issue.
Yeah, so crazy. And so again, wasn't left on her doorstep, but because of my mom caring for her mother. And so she was away from our house to care for her mother. As an adult who's caring for my aging mom at this point, I understand, but at my 11-year-old self did not understand, or my high school teen years didn't understand. So
right there, when you say that the certain age of you that did not understand, there's another shame attached to that, right? Which is, why am I not grieving like I should?
Oh, yeah. It's true. It's true. And so we have to, it's so much work, but it's worth it. But we have to ask the questions, ask ourselves those questions, like, why am I feeling this shame in this area? Because 9 most often we'll find that when we bring the things to the light, then there's really no shame there. Like there's no reason for me to feel shame in having this grief attached to this particular situation.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
It's like acknowledging it and bringing it to the surface. And most often when we speak, we're like, okay,
But even learning how to speak is so hard.
It is. Yeah.
I will share that I come from a very abusive background. That started when I was 6, and it lasted through 17. I was sexually abused by members of my family and friends of family. And it's taken me 40 years to tell my story. My father was the abandoner of the whole process. So when he died, I felt no remorse. I felt no grief in the moment that he died, because I was still filled with anger.
Yeah.
And then I asked my therapist, is something wrong with me? Why am I not grieving the way that my wife is, the way that our children are, that grandpa's gone? Why can't I grieve like that too? And he had to walk me through those stair steps going down to the place where that silencing, where it began for me, that I had to unpack that. And I had to give I think the most freeing thing I heard my therapist say was like what you just said, there's no timetable of grieving.
Yeah.
I didn't have to hurry, because I think that's what my problem was. I should be over this by now.
Yes.
This happened with my dad. And why don't I feel this way? I should be feeling bad. I should be feeling sad and upset so I can get over it. But I can't. And that's because, as my therapist pointed out, because that is the many years of abuse that I've lived through that had to work itself out first.
Yeah.
And then once it did, I was able to grieve.
Yeah.
And that's hard for a lot of people. And I could not imagine what you must have gone through, losing so many in your life. And to see you sitting here with us today is a testimony. Because when I look at you, I see warrior on you. And that just hit me when we took our break.
Yeah.
It's amazing the work. I can see the work of God through you. What do you say to those that are still stuck there?
Yeah. First, I just want to say that there is hope. I go back to, what I said earlier with seeing someone ahead, to say that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, even though it may not feel, you may feel no inkling of it at the moment. But having someone experience a lot of loss, a lot of grief, different types, and seeing them kind of on the other side, or even in some of it still, gives hope that that they won't always feel the way that they are feeling, that they won't be always stuck in that moment that they're in right now.
And let me just emphasize too for folks that when I say this to you, Natasha, I'm not saying this as you're across the finish line, you have no problems with grief anymore, and it's all over. Life does not work that way.
Right, it does not.
And I really believe that that's what gets us into a lot of failure within our own faith, because we think well, because God should be working, right?
Yeah.
And it's not over. So maybe God's not working, or maybe I've stopped working, and that's when we fail.
Yeah.
When the reality is, then maybe that pain is there because humanly, we are human. We're not a light switch, right?
Yes. Yeah. I love that so much. And that's one thing that I kind of put some emphasis in the book on healing, because I feel like we can be healed, but it's not. It's a reframing of what healing is. Healing is not, you cut your arm and, it heals up. No, this healing is like moving more towards a wholeness in God. It's not, that I will never feel sad again, or that I will never, think of my loved one. It's not that type of it's a reframing of what healing is. It's not that I will just never, well, it's gone. The grief is like totally gone, and I'm never gonna feel it or sense it. That's just not what it is. But
no, that's being called superhuman. And as we say this, I'm hoping that this will relieve the pressure from others to think, oh wow, you mean I don't have to try? You mean I don't need to force it? I don't need to hurry up? Because that's not what healing is. Healing is on your own terms, as you're capable and as you're willing. Right?
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. That's so good.
Well, you made it good because you brought it here today. So let's go through a quick lightning round, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot, and man, it's been like an oasis. I want to know this. If you could have, so put your thinking brain on, right? If you could have a billboard anywhere, what message would you put on it?
Every loss is worthy of the space and grace to grieve.
Every loss is worthy of its grief.
Of the space and grace to grieve.
Space and grace to grieve. Yeah. Yeah. So true. Awesome. Here's one. Now, what bad advice have you received in your profession, your area of expertise, that you think people should avoid?
That advice, I would say, okay, yes. So this is horrible advice.
Awesome.
But I had someone to tell me that to not tell my story, and my story was between me and God. Yeah.
Well, then is it a story anymore?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, we just close ourselves off from the whole. Well, let me just ask you this. Who's the story for?
I believe the story is for me, but it's for others.
Yes.
Like, it's to help others. Yeah.
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 That's right. Because if you can't read someone else's book, how do you know your own story? I mean, you can't compare. I can't compare your grief with mine. I can't compare your trauma with mine. But if I listen to you, Natasha, and I read your story word for word, then it's nothing I cannot insert myself in your place, but I can see and I can hear and I can listen what you went through. And then I have to question myself. What do I know from Natasha's story? And then when I do look at my own pain, I don't need to be worried about a similarity, but I think maybe what should encourage me is that someone else went through it too. And maybe it was incomparable to mine, but this person, Natasha, feels, and maybe that's something I haven't done. So maybe that's something I can learn to do.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah.
How can people develop their voice and talk about their pain to move into the present, from past to the present?
I think one simple way of doing so is to journaling, of course, just writing it out. And even if you're not a big journaler, even though I write, I'm not a big journaler, which is interesting, but they can just basically just write down like these three things, like a loss or an event. How did they feel? And let's see. Yes. And then how, I think I'm mixing myself up.
No, I'm with you.
Yeah. So writing down the loss or event, and then acknowledge the feeling, associate a feeling, assign a feeling to it. And then how ways that they could see a path forward. Mm-hmm. Something along those lines. So it gives a start to say, like, if I'm going to tell the story of like, okay, I experienced the loss of a child in 2001. And during that time, I felt XYZ. Mm. You know, I'm trying to process it. And so that's the beginning of the story, really. Those two things, acknowledging what the event was and the feeling associated with it. So those are the big things to get it started. And then it can go from there.
Yes, I agreed, because it's hard to go back. It is so hard to go back in time. And I really believe, as many people say, I wish I had a time machine. No, they don't.
They don't.
They don't.
That's so true.
I don't want one. I don't want one.
Good.
No, yeah, exactly. I'm good from what I walked away from.
Yeah.
You know? So, final thought for survivors. Why is sharing one story important, and why does it matter?
Yeah, it so matters. Every story matters so much. And we kind of touched on it, but the short of it is, when we hear someone's story, we're able to do couple of things. We're able to empathize. We're able to put ourselves in their shoes. We're able to have compassion upon them, as well as see ourselves. So it does so much. It allows us, we can gain more courage, more insight, so many things when we hear other stories. To not hear other stories again is to really be a one, really thinking of yourself, really. It's like we have more power when we're able to share in one another's stories.
Right. Awesome. Natasha, where can people find you?
Yes, thank you so much. So you can find me, you can find my book, Can You Just Sit With Me? Healthy Grieving for the Losses of Life, wherever books are sold. And you can connect with me across social media at I am Natasha Smith.
I just want to say, I love the title of your book and podcast. Can you just sit with me? Yeah.
Yes.
Because that just says it all. You don't need to talk. You don't need to say prolific words. You just need to sit. That's fantastic. Natasha, thank you so much for joining us today and just sharing your vulnerability, trusting us with your story and communicating that today with us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you again for this conversation. I really enjoyed it.
I did as well. I'd love to have you back to do some more things. That would be great. So thank you. And folks, we look forward to having you back as well. And thank you for joining us. And remember, share this episode out with those who you feel would need to hear it, maybe benefit. Maybe it's just for you. And maybe you just listen to a few things that really you resonate with, and you just think, this is good for me. Maybe don't even think about how it may be good for somebody else. What about for you? And then do something about that. So everybody, thanks for joining us here. And hope this helps. Remember, your story matters. See you next time. Bye.
Thanks for joining us today on Your Story Matter podcast with Branon Dempsey. Please kindly rate and comment on today's podcast. This has been a Your Story Matters digital production. Copyright 2024. Hope you were inspired from today's episode as you grow in your recovery from trauma, because your story matters.
Hey, survivors and friends, will you help us get the word out to bump up our algorithm for more people to see and hear these messages to help them in their journey of healing. So if you enjoy this content, will you please like and share, follow this page, especially if you're listening to this podcast and or watching this by YouTube. Please click the subscribe button, and thank you.